Welcome to our webinar, Mitigating a Hazard, our Humanness. This is the same presentation I gave at the National Business Aviation Association annual convention in Las Vegas last October. That was a pleasure to be there and meet a lot of the business aviation folks. I am Gene Benson. I'll be your presenter today. I'm a senior consultant in human factors and aviation for Bright Spot Incorporated. I've been a pilot for 51 years, even as much as I hate to admit that. I first soloed on my 16th birthday. I've enjoyed a wonderful career, which I've combined my love of flying with my background in psychology and in aviation. By way of introduction, let me say that we are all professionals and good at what we do. We have had extensive training and we're all experienced in our professions. Yet we often hear of one of our peers doing something that seems to be really dumb. But professional pilots, maintenance technicians, air traffic controllers, and managers aren't dumb people. You can't get there by being dumb. Yet airplanes run out of fuel, run off the end of runways, and do lots of other things that aren't supposed to happen. Why do we make the errors that we make? Well, often it's because our humanness gets in the way of our training, experience, and our professionalism. We don't want to stop being human and become machines, but learning how to mitigate risk that is presented by the hazard of our humanness can reduce the likelihood of making errors and therefore can improve safety. Like the little flyby there. Well, here's our flight plan for today. We will identify a few deviations, let's just say devious human factors. And we'll look at how they can increase our risk of error, and we will develop some mitigation strategies for those. We're only going to deal with a few. There are plenty. As we begin, I would like to invite everyone to participate in our webinar today by adding comments or asking questions. You can type in a question at any time during the presentation by using the control panel that's in the upper left of your screen. If you're using that, just type. Don't hit enter or return until you finish. When you hit enter or return, it sends whatever you've typed so far. So that's just one thing to be aware of. We also have the capability to have live discussion if you have a microphone or a headset. I think it's best if we wait to have the live discussion until the end of the presentation. At that time, if you'd like to comment or ask a question, simply click on the hand symbol that's on your control panel. And that's the raise your hand, actually. And I can then open your microphone and recognize you by your first name and your last initial. Again, we will not have that live discussion until the end of the presentation. If I do not get to all the typed in questions during the webinar, we'll get them all answered via email within 24 hours. The first factor we're going to look at is one that's very familiar to all of us, and that is complacency. Complacency is arguably the most common culprit of all our human factors. Of course, complacency can lead to loss of situational awareness, as what happened to this woman. She's about to have a very rude awakening to her situation, I think. Let's look at an example. We've all had photos taken on a recent vacation, and we've probably saved them on a flash drive. Well, maybe a few pictures aren't very good, so we decide to delete them. Unfortunately, we selected the entire folder rather than just the pictures we want to delete. Deleting files or folders from a flash drive doesn't offer the protection of placing deleted files in a recycle bin. They will be gone. But we're given a warning after hitting that delete key. But we may have seen the warning box many times, and we're accustomed to just clicking yes. So there's that sick feeling as soon as we realize that we just lost our photos of our vacation. Back in the 80s, I was based at Oakland International Airport, and I drove Highway 101 frequently between San Jose and Oakland. One morning, typical stop-and-go traffic, a car came screeching up behind me and narrowly avoided rear-ending me. I just thought it was some jerk not paying attention. But a little way farther down the road, somebody else came screeching up behind me also. That time, there was an opening in the left lane, and he swerved out, pulled beside me, and we exchanged, let's just say, greetings via internationally understood sign language, and then he continued on. As the traffic stopped ahead, another car narrowly avoided rear-ending me. But this time, that car pulled up on my right. Nice young woman signaled me for her to roll down my window. First I thought she was just attracted to my dashing good looks, but I rolled down the window and she politely informed me that my brake lights weren't working. Of course, I smiled. I was ready to thank her and maybe invite her to dinner when her smile went away. She said something to the effect that I was a menace on the highway and I should be given a rectal exam with a cattle prod. Ouch. That cured my complacency about pre-flighting my car. Well, at least for a little while. I'm not as good as I once was, but I frequently touch the brake pedal when the car is near something that will reflect the brake lights, just to make sure they're working. But complacency can also make its way into our professional lives. Here's how that happens. First, let's make sure we know that this is not usually a problem for inexperienced people. Experienced people are actually more likely to make errors arising from complacency. It's not generally a newbie problem. It's the experienced person that becomes more complacent. Complacency arises from two related states. Familiarity is actually our brain recalling what has been experienced in the past and comparing it to what we are experiencing at the present time. Expectancy is our brain projecting that familiarity into our perception of the present. We see what we expect to see, or we hear what we expect to hear. Pilots might miss an unlatched baggage compartment during the walk-around or, the pre-flight inspection. We see a latch in place hundreds of times and we develop a familiarity with it. That leads to an expectancy that the latch will be secured. Of course, I guess we might notice this amount of luggage sitting there waiting to be put aboard. And of course, we're guaranteed not to miss this one. If this compartment is open, you got to hand it to the Russians on that one. Or a pilot might expect a change of altitude from ATC and mistake a similar call sign for his or her own call sign. The pilot has become familiar with the route, has developed an expectancy for when a descent clearance will be given. He or she hears the expected rather than what is actually said. Then the controller might hear what is expected and the error chain gets the next link. Maintenance technicians are also a victim of expectancy. A simple operation such as securing cowl latches is done hundreds of times and becomes very familiar. That familiarity then leads to an expectancy that all the steps have been completed and we have complacency about the operation. The complacency might result in an airplane being released with a cowl that is not latched securely. A flight crew member doing the walk-around inspection is also familiar with seeing the cowl securely latched and has an expectancy that everything is secure. When an error only leads to a bit of embarrassment, well, that's actually a pretty good day. So, how can we deliver a knockout punch to complacency? Well, we've all heard the old saying about what happens when we assume. I'll let you finish that one for yourselves. An effective mitigation strategy for complacency, though, is to develop a habit of questioning everything. In a restaurant, examine the meal as soon as it's delivered. Make sure exactly what was ordered. Of course, in the workplace, question and verify as a matter of routine. Has necessary maintenance work been completed? For pilots, is that clearance going to work? Is the autoflight system set up and working properly? Is that really the correct airport? We narrowly avoided disaster at least twice in the past 12 months with that one. Or for maintenance, did I secure all the latches? How about discussion on complacency? Before I go on, someone typed in a question here, how do I increase the volume? That would be on your machine, how you would do that. I don't think I can really address that one. I will try and talk a little bit louder though. Another question we have on complacency says, in the rail industry, I see complacency on a daily basis. Union rules make disciplinary action difficult. Telling people to check their orders in a restaurant does not seem to be a sufficient solution to that problem. Must be more that can be done. Well, I would say this. If the problem is rampant, it perhaps goes beyond complacency and into a workplace culture. Changing the workplace culture can be done. It's not easy, but it can be done. It does, though, have to be done, right from the top down. First step has to be getting buy-in from your top management. and also top management, not just from the company but also from the union. I have some experience in working with this kind of situation, so if you'd like to if you'd like to email me on that, we can see what we can do about that. We can be happy to talk to you about it. And let's see, I have some other questions here about the volume. Somebody says they're having problems with the volume also. I think it's on my end. I'm getting plenty of bars on mine. I really don't think it's on my end. Somebody else says it's just fine. So please, if your volume is too low, just check your machine a little bit. I can't crank mine up any higher. It's already up at full bore here. What else do we have? Oh, okay, here's one more. Wait a minute, let me read this one first. Okay, this one says, develop an attitude of mindfulness. If I catch myself being complacent, I work on noticing and bringing my mind back to the task at hand. Yep, that's a good one. And I have numerous other comments that the volume is fine. Somebody's been around aviation for a while. They said 5x5 volume here. That's something you don't hear much anymore. I'm old enough to know what that means. And another one. I work for an air charter company. Recently picked up 2 recently retired airline captains. Thought their experience would raise the level of the whole operation, but had opposite effect. They are quite complacent about procedures. Seem to have idea that our airplanes are so simple that our procedures are beneath them. Now I'm seeing the much less experienced pilots following their lead. Any suggestions? Well, before I address that, I want to add that we'll be talking about something called normative social influence shortly, and that is also appropriate here. So hold on for that one. For this particular situation, the problem could be addressed by replacing those individuals, but probably a longer-term solution is preferred because you might have more folks like that coming down the pike. A solid CRM program that is more than just sitting and listening to a lecture can do wonders in a situation like this. CRM for a small or medium business aviation operator is very different than CRM in an airline operation. These are the kinds of things that we can successfully address. So, let me know if I can do anything for you there. Pardon me for a second here because I'm still getting some comments about the volume being low. No, I'm sorry. I'm cranked up all the way, so I'll just try to talk a little bit louder. I guess that's the best I can do with that one. So most people are saying that it's okay. Okay, and I think other than comments on volume, I think we're all set. I'm just going to clear these. Give me more room to work here. Oops, I may have just... If you just typed one in, send it again, please. I think I clicked and one came up just as I clicked it off, and I'll come back to that later. All right, with that being said, let's move on to external factors. I'm going to address external factors here. As humans, we have the unique ability to apply logic and reasoning to our decision making. But sometimes factors that are only indirectly related to the decision provide powerful motivation to influence our decisions away from the logical and the reasonable. Now here's a video, and I'm going to apologize in advance for this video because the quality of it is very poor. It's not the transmission of it. The quality of the video is very poor, and you may or may not hear any audio on this. That depends on the setup. The audio is not critical to it. Let me just run the video quickly here. I'll set the stage. This was taken, I believe, somewhere in Europe, and there's a woman trying to cross a busy street, and there's a man who I believe is taking the video, is starting to coax her on. He's getting impatient. Okay, I don't know if you heard any audio on that or not. I suspect you probably did not. But You can see at the beginning the woman was making a logical decision that the traffic posed too great a risk to attempt to cross the street. But with the coaxing of the man taking the video serving as the external factor, she eventually made the decision that the risk was acceptable and began to cross. I don't know any more than what's shown in the video, but it appears that it did not end well here. So we saw what that external factor was. She was making a decision. Somebody is trying to convince her otherwise. Let's look at another example. It's a special occasion, such as a birthday or an anniversary. Your spouse is making a very special dinner to celebrate. The agreed upon time for dinner is 7 p.m. and the unstated exclamation is sharp. You're leaving the airport at 08:30, let's say. You sense that something is burning at home and it probably isn't the dinner. Of course, the speed limit is 35, and you know that's actually reasonable for the area. But that sense of impending doom at home is a powerful motivating factor. So we sneak an extra few miles an hour, then a few more, and then we see the police car just as we blow by it doing almost 30 miles an hour over the limit. So now added to the original problem of arriving late for dinner is the added barb, and you got a ticket too. We knew better than to drive that fast, but that external factor of showing up for a cold dinner and a furious spouse influenced our decision. Of course, external factors can influence our aeronautical decisions also. An impatient passenger or a need to get home can influence our decisions regarding weather or maintenance items. External factors, whatever form they take, can be extremely powerful motivators. I think that a little better understanding of the science can be helpful here. What we are really talking about here is decision making. Anything published about decision making, including ADM or aeronautical decision making, that tries to improve our decision making really can only address what happens on the conscious level. The conscious level or conscious mind refers to our activities that involve rational thought and logical reasoning. For example, anybody involved in aviation, pilots, managers, dispatchers, technicians, even passengers, know that having sufficient fuel quantity for a particular flight is, well, that's pretty important. So the rational and the logical thing to do is to make sure that there is enough fuel aboard to conduct the planned flight and also some reserve to cover unplanned contingencies. But airplanes running out of fuel is very common among small airplanes, and it's happened in bigger airplanes also. How can that be? The unconscious mind consists of the processes that occur automatically without us being aware of them. They include, among other things, past reinforcements and motivation. Many experiences from our past will help to influence our decision making, and therefore influence our behavior. This is exemplified by how our past decisions have been reinforced. A previously taken risky action that has worked out well will have been positively reinforced and will influence our unconscious mind to repeat that action in the future. But if the action was negatively reinforced, that is, the action did not have a good result, the unconscious mind will guide future decisions away from repeating that action. I'll use an example from small general aviation airplanes. The pilot who does not visually check the fuel quantity before flight has that action positively reinforced by each flight that does not end in fuel exhaustion. Eventually, the entire decision about visually checking fuel is made in the unconscious mind without the pilot even considering the need to look in the tanks. But one incident of fuel exhaustion will provide a negative reinforcement, and the pilot, assuming he or she survives and continues to fly, will cause the unconscious mind to at least bump the decision about verifying fuel into the conscious mind. These unconscious processes have a great impact on our decision making. We often read about an accident and find ourselves puzzled about why the pilot made a decision that seems so obviously wrong. Not always, but I believe frequently, the unconscious mind has played a big role in the formulation of that decision. Our motivation on the unconscious level can play a huge role. Sometimes that unconscious motivation is egocentric, such as wanting to show off piloting skill. And sometimes it comes from a true desire to solve a problem, such as getting somebody where they need to go. But the strong processes operating on the unconscious level can provide a strong basis for the formulation of our decisions on the conscious level. I've had the opportunity many times, unfortunately, to talk with pilots who have been involved in aircraft accidents and survived. In every case but one, the pilot was aware that a bad decision had been made and was willing to accept responsibility. A phrase such as, "I don't know what I was thinking," was a familiar theme. Pilots were fully aware of having made a bad decision and acknowledged that they knew better. But each case also had an explanation for what circumstances influenced the decision. These circumstances are what we call external factors. We understand the compelling need to meet our commitments, such as being somewhere on time or to provide a promised flight. We know that the various external factors can be powerful motivators. But we also know that the vast majority of pilots are not daredevils or excessive risk takers. Yet most serious accidents involve a bad decision by a pilot, often a very experienced pilot. One explanation is that we are making many of our decisions in the unconscious mind, and those decisions are frequently based on our unconscious motivations. Our unconscious mind bends the facts to fit the motivations and fools us into thinking that we're making a logical decision. We have procedures and regulations for much of what we do, particularly in aviation. They're written in blood. Please don't be a blood donor. Are there times that we need to deviate from a procedure or a reg? Sure there are. But make a habit of strictly following procedures and regs unless you can state a concrete, valid reason for deviating. Listen to your little inner voice. If it's telling you that something isn't a good idea, it probably isn't. Or if you just get an uncomfortable feeling about something, there's probably a valid reason for that. There's actually psychology behind that, but we're not going to go into it here because don't get me going on psychobabble or I'll talk about it all day. All right. How about any discussion on external factors? Let me look and see what we have. Here's one. Let's see. This one says huge factor in huge factor in aircraft maintenance. Always pressure to get the airplane back in service and defer issues. Well, yeah, that's true. In some operations it is. Some operations it's not. Sometimes that pressure is self-induced. We want to make sure that our technicians really understand, that our idea here is safety. Sometimes people get so wrapped up in it that they take it on as their own personal responsibility when really that isn't coming down from higher up. If that's true, then perhaps your organization could use some team building, maybe some procedural changes to empower the maintenance techs. We can help with that. If you want to contact me after the webinar, there are some ideas that we have to do that. And somebody just added, what is that psychobabble around the little inner voice, so we can research it ourselves. Tell you what, if you really want to know about that, shoot me an email and I will send you the full explanation of it in a day or so. And another comment here said, likely Buddy Holly's 22-year-old pilot knew not to take off. I imagine there was lots of external pressure there. Don't know for sure, my opinion. Yep, I think I would agree with that. Remember, this was back, really before CRM was around, and certainly back before CRM found its way into general aviation or even business aviation. I think today a lot of people have a lot better understanding about these kinds of things. This is something that when I teach CRM, I really get into the external factors, and there's a whole lot we could say about it. You can easily do an hour on external factors, and you could probably do a semester on it, I guess, for that matter. Okay, I think that's all we have on external factors, so we will forge on. Distractions. I'll take just a few minutes to talk about distractions here. Has anyone ever gotten into trouble because they became distracted? This guy did. If you can see that Good enough? Look at where his eyes are. Anybody ever been down that road? Well, maybe it's better if we don't answer that here in the public forum. We manage our workload in whatever we're doing, whether it be flying an approach to minimums, driving our car to the airport, making dinner, or paying our bills. These are all complex activities. There's many tasks and subtasks to be managed there. There's always something else competing for our attention. Many activities we undertake are complex activities with many tasks. It's rare that we have the luxury of concentrating on just one task. Wouldn't that be nice? There's always something else competing for our attention. In other words, we must share our cognitive resources. There are many individual differences in ability to focus and prevent distraction from causing a problem, and of course that's part of our humanness. We humans are bombarded by stimuli. Some of it requires our attention and some does not. There are individual differences in our ability to sort out the important from the irrelevant, and training can help us improve on that. One human fact that is well known to psychologists but largely ignored by society is that the whole concept of multitasking is a myth. There simply is no such thing. We can attend to only one thing at a time. We might appear to multitask, but we're actually shifting our attention from one item or task to the next. And it gets even more complex. Let's take an example. We receive a text message. We must detect the syllabus, the syllabus, remember me. We must detect the stimulus, interpret what it is telling us, decide if it warrants our attention, decide if action is needed, and then if action is required, we must decide on appropriate action and make the response. You'll then probably repeat that process with many more stimuli and eventually make our way back to evaluate the effectiveness of our response to the first stimulus. Our brain can shift focus like this many times per second, but the more stimuli that we add, the more complex and the more difficult the process becomes. Let's take an example from highway safety. Our mobile phone rings while we're driving. We determine that the call is from our company and our decision is to answer it. We learn that something very important requires our input or requires action. One of the dangers here is that a stimulus will be presented that our brain evaluates as being supercritical, and then we'll fixate on that stimulus or some aspect of our response to it. While our brain is fixed on that, we might miss a stimulus that is also critical. This is what we mean when we talk about a distraction. Scientifically, we're simply attending to a situation we were alerted to by a stimulus to the exclusion of the other stimuli. We could all come up with examples from aviation. Unfortunately, we could all come up with examples from aviation. Of course, the most infamous and one of the accidents that helped launch CRM was the crash of Eastern Airlines Flight 401 in the Everglades in 1972. You probably already know the story. Later determined to be simply a burned out light bulb, they did not receive a down and locked indication for the nose gear while on approach to Miami. They broke off the approach and went into holding. The captain instructed the FO to engage the autopilot, but the system ended up in control wheel steering mode rather than altitude hold. The captain is thought to have bumped the yoke when he turned to talk to the flight engineer, and that initiated a slight descent. Long story short, the crew was fixated on the nose gear indication, and the airplane gradually descended into the dark swamp. That could never happen again. Could it? In October 2009, Northwest Airlines crew overflew their destination in Minneapolis by 150 miles. They had their laptops out and they were fixated on a new scheduling program. CRM actually saved the day when a flight attendant realized that something was not right and politely asked when they would be landing. And before the days of CRM, that flight attendant never would have questioned that captain on that, probably. Let's see what we might be able to do to reduce our vulnerability to distractions. As we engage in complex activities like flying an airplane, we're bombarded by stimuli. Our brain has to detect the stimulus, decide on its importance, interpret its meaning, decide if action is needed, and decide on the appropriate response. We can start by recognizing two enemies, the sinister sisters, tunneling and dwell time. Tunneling, or cognitive tunneling as it's technically called, is a narrowing of the attention that blocks out stimuli not perceived to be directly related to the situation at hand. It's recently been identified more with certain areas of glass cockpit displays. Dwell time is the amount of time spent attending to a stimulus before switching focus to a different stimulus. Remember that we're constantly switching our attention from one object to another. Dwelling too long on one object means that we are not dealing with other, possibly even more important objects. So how can we avoid that critical distraction? We must discipline ourselves to know when concentration is critical. We must impose the sterile cockpit rule, even if not in an aviation environment. Let me stop here for a second and say I deal with a lot of different industries in addition to aviation. And sterile cockpit is something that I have put into a lot of different operators, from manufacturing to medicine, surgery, everything. We need to concentrate on the task at hand, and any discussion that's not related to the task in hand is using our cognitive resources. And we often just plain old can't afford to do that. All right, we must recognize when we're being distracted. For example, we're flying an approach. Anything other than that approach is on our thoughts, we're being distracted. We need to get sufficient sleep. Fatigue is a cause of fixation and tunneling. There's been a lot of talk about fatigue lately. It's really risen to prominence in the human factors area, and for good reason. And finally, we must follow a plan. In some cases, that would be, of course, a checklist. Discussion on distraction. I don't see any questions typed in here. Go ahead and type in questions or comments. Here's one popping up. I'm a plant manager for high-stakes manufacturing. We have way too much loss because technicians think the world will end if the schedule is not kept, and they shortcut procedures. Thoughts? Well, I guess the first question that comes to mind is, why do the workers believe that? There must be something going on, perhaps in your culture, that reinforces that belief. So that's where I would start looking, is what are they told, or what sort of disciplinary action takes place if they fall behind schedule. In any case, I did a lengthy project, just recently finished it up with a pharmaceutical manufacturer, which of course is a high-stakes operation, and they contacted me because they were having millions of dollars a year of loss, attributed to human error. In that industry, there's very little chance that bad product is going to get shipped. They have lots and lots of internal controls and tests on it. But when a mistake is made, sometimes the product is lost and has to be dumped, and sometimes it can be fixed, but there's all kinds of steps and time and expense to go through that to make it work. When they have errors, in that industry they refer to them as deviations, and they all have to be reported to the FDA. So I went in, I looked at their operations, and I got a list of all the deviations they'd had in, I think, the last 2 years, and there were way more than I would have expected to have, and some were relatively minor, some were very, very expensive and cost the company a lot of money. On that one particular error was $2.5 million, and it was a very simple error. So what I ended up doing for that one was to create a computer-based training program that they promised everybody in the company would take, from the CEO down to the folks who clean the place up. And it borrowed from aviation maintenance a process called the Dirty Dozen. And there are 12 human factor error causal factors there. And I adapted them to that particular situation, and everybody is looking at a 4-hour program on these Dirty Dozen, And then annually they're going to do some recurrent training on that as well. And recurrent training is very important on anything like this because of what? Complacency, right? Any other questions on this one? We have some other, where can I find more information on tunneling in reference to glass cockpits? Yeah, leave that one there and I will, I'll see that one, or you can shoot me a reminder email, but I'll see that one in the end and I will send you some information on that one. All right, I guess with that we can move on to something that really demonstrates our humanness. This one, I really like this one. It's called normative social influence and frequently shortened up to just norms. Remember Cheers? Norm! If you remember that TV show, it illustrates our point in more ways than everybody yelling Norm when Norm entered the bar. The characters were all very strong personalities, but at one time or another, they all got drawn into a situation that they knew they shouldn't be in. Everybody wants to fit into the group. Our humanness sometimes causes us to be silent when we know we should speak up. We all like to think we outgrew that, but the fact is we never outgrow being human. Back to psychology class for a minute. Norms are unwritten rules and procedures followed by the majority of the group. Norms are part of the workplace culture. They can be positive or they can be negative. Unapproved shortcuts can develop into negative norms over time. Much of what we know about preventing human error comes from the study of tragic accidents. Norms applies to just about any social environment we can imagine. It also, of course, applies to work environments such as the maintenance shop or the flight deck. Unfortunately, it often illustrates very serious accidents. This accident happened in May of 1979, shortly after the airplane took off from O'Hare Airport in Chicago. It involved an American Airlines DC-10. 273 people died as a result of the accident. And that accident was caused by a structural failure of the attach points of the left engine pylon. This photo was taken just before impact. Note the missing engine and the trailing vapor. The pylon failed because maintenance personnel did not follow approved procedures for changing the left engine, which caused damage to the pylon. Investigation revealed that maintenance personnel had devised a method of changing the engine that saved a considerable amount of time. The approved procedure involves supporting the engine on a specially designed dolly during installation. But many months before this accident, someone discovered that much time could be saved if the engine was simply supported by using a forklift. The new procedure was never submitted to the aircraft manufacturer for approval, but it became widely used and also became the procedure taught to new employees. The procedure worked fine until one day when the hydraulic pressure on the forklift bled down during a break. Excess stress was put on the parts of the engine pylon. Now that pylon was damaged when that happened, but the damage wasn't visible. After about 2 months in service, took 2 months, that pylon failed and caused the accident. Perfect example of normative social influence. A procedure is changed over time by an informal process and becomes the accepted way of doing something. Or, established procedures are violated by experienced people as part of a group dynamic. Let's look at an accident that I think anyone involved in business aviation has heard about before. It illustrates norms operating on the flight deck. It happened in 2004. It involved a G3 in Houston. This accident involves a little different take on norms here. The aircraft struck a light pole and crashed about 3 miles southwest of the Hobby Airport in Houston. It was on an ILS approach to runway 4 when this happened. The 2 pilots and the flight attendant were killed. An individual in a vehicle near the airport received minor injuries, and the airplane, of course, was destroyed by impact forces. Now, this crew was very experienced. It consisted of the current chief pilot and the man who had served as chief pilot up until about 6 months prior to the accident. A couple of very experienced individuals. This was actually a repositioning flight from Dallas to Houston to pick up former President George H.W. Bush for a flight to Ecuador. The flight was scheduled to depart Dallas at 0500, but it didn't actually depart until about 0530. The flight was scheduled to depart Houston at 0654. The accident occurred at about 06:15. Time was starting to get tight. Think there was any external pressure working here? Picking up a former president of the United States? About 1 minute after intercepting the localizer, the captain commented, "I can't get the approach mode on my thing." First officer replied that he could not get the approach mode to activate either. The airplane was about 1,000 feet below the glide slope at this point and remained 600 to 1,000 feet below the glide slope until impact. About 35 seconds later, the first officer asked, "What's wrong with this thing?" The captain replied, "I don't know." Now what's the red flag here? Think there might be an impending loss of situational awareness? About 6 seconds later, the first officer asked, "What do we have set wrong? We have long-range nav or something that we shouldn't have?" About 5 seconds after that, the captain reported, "Got nav, VOR1. First officer replied, "Okay, we're high on the glide slope now." Captain responded, "Just going to have to do it this way." About 21 seconds later, the first officer stated, "Guess so. Yeah, you're on the glide slope now." The airplane was 700 feet below the glide slope at this time. About 18 seconds later, the captain asked, "Are we going to descend to 244 feet? First officer responded, "Yeah." About 20 seconds later, the captain asked, "What happened? Did you change my frequency?" The first officer responded, "Yeah, we were down there. The VOR frequency was on." The airplane was 900 feet above the ground and about 800 feet below the glide slope. First officer then stated, "We're all squared away now. You got it." The captain responded, "Yeah, but I don't know if I can get back on it in time." And the first officer replied, "Yeah, you will. We're squared away now." About 28 seconds later, the first officer stated, I'm outside." Then about 8 seconds later stated, "Okay, coming up on 244. Captain responded, "Give me full flaps." About 3 seconds later, the first officer said, "Up, up, 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 up," 7 times. Simultaneously, ATC transmitted a low altitude warning. No further communications were received from the airplane. The airplane impacted a light pole at an altitude of about 198 feet and about 3¼ miles from the runway 4 threshold. Crew continued the approach after a loss of situational awareness. That's about all we can say there. The most likely explanation for the confusion is this. The indicator shown here on the left is similar to the one in the accident airplane. The glide slope indicator is on the left side of the display, and the fast-slow indicator is on the right side of the display. The indicator on the right is similar to the indicator in several other company airplanes, with a glide slope indicator on the right and the fast-slow indicator on the left. Contrary to extensive training experience, the crew continued an approach that they both knew was not stabilized, and they must have realized that situational awareness had been lost. Also, a simple cross-check of altitude at the outer marker probably would have caught the error. Plenty of procedures were violated during this approach. Both pilots were aware that something wasn't right, yet they continued the approach in low IFR conditions. Why? Perhaps it was normative social influence, or norms. There was considerable pressure to not be late arriving to pick up a former president of the United States. Executing a missed approach would have surely caused them to be late. Perhaps neither pilot wanted to be the one to speak up and say, "Let's get out of here and figure this out." Each pilot went along with the errors, knowing full well that this was not good operating practice. Perhaps if either one of the pilots had been junior, the senior pilot would have been more likely to set the example and execute a missed approach. We know what was said in the cockpit, but we'll never know the thoughts of those pilots. Would this accident have happened if one crew member had been senior and one junior? Well, maybe not that junior. That's why we have CRM training. Bill Grimes, VP for Safety at Citation Air, recently said on an MDA podcast that behavioral drift poses the single greatest risk to aviation professionalism and safety. As the norms of an organization are eroded, they're replaced by workarounds that eventually set new standards. People start cutting corners. All that leads us to believe that we're in a safe place when we're not. And I think he hit the nail right on the head, and that applies to many, many, many operations and many, many, many flights. And fortunately for everybody, most of the time, it does work out, but it's just that once in a while that it does not. Discussion on norms. What do we have here? Something is getting typed as I speak. There it goes. Says, yikes, I see that kind of scenario every day. Nobody wants to be a wuss. Can you do anything about that? Well, I can present an engaging CRM program that addresses the issue. Hey, thanks for the lead into the commercial here. Often after these programs that we do, people feel more empowered. They feel a little more willing to speak up. Again, a little more instruction on being effectively assertive can be a big help, and we're going to look at that next. Our next section is on being effectively assertive. But yes, these are all things that CRM teaches. And when I say CRM, I'm not just talking about aviation. We can do CRM for all kinds of things. We're doing CRM for the medical profession, both human and veterinarian, at the moment. These things apply, you know, if it's high stakes and there's humans involved, we can do it. We can adapt CRM to something that will be effective. No more questions on that or comments. Okay, assertiveness. Being assertive when necessary can be an important element in accident prevention. Sometimes it's necessary to defeat norms in action. I consider it to be a very critical aspect of CRM. I suppose this person was assertive. Remember the guy that his eyes wandered here right in the beginning? But that isn't what we're talking about here. The lady was assertive in throwing the wine at him, but that's not what we're after. I don't think that throwing coffee on an errant captain would somehow contribute positively to the safety of flight. Probably not a real good idea. But if we are reasonably confident that procedures are not being followed, or the approaches become unstabilized, or there is uncertainty about something and situational awareness is in jeopardy, the ability to be effectively assertive can save the day. Anyone involved in managing the airplane, flying the airplane, maintaining the airplane, might find a need to be more assertive in the interest of safety. We might, for example, have a situation in which a technician believes that some maintenance should be done, but the aircraft owner or manager resists because of costs. Sometimes we might need to be a bit more assertive, but we need to do it right if we're going to be effective. Assertiveness is the ability to express opinions and needs in a positive and productive manner. A lack of assertiveness can result in having a pilot go along with the group or succumb to external factors. Being assertive is not the same as being aggressive. Assertive behavior is not hostile, blaming, threatening, demanding, or sarcastic. Assertiveness differs from aggression in that standing up for yourself does not trespass on the rights of others. Assertiveness means communicating what you want in a clear manner, respecting your own rights and feelings and the rights and feelings of others. It's easier to speak up and be more assertive when we know how to do it in a positive way. Here are 4 important elements to keep in mind. First, we must get the person's attention and state the problem. The lady throwing the wine glass, she got his attention, but that probably wasn't the best way to do it. It's very important to express what we believe to be the likely consequences in a simple manner and without exaggeration. We must have a solution and offer it. And finally, we have to solicit feedback. Of course, there's a right way and a wrong way to get attention. Hey, buddy, can you dim that forehead a little? The glare is blinding me. Or, hey, lady, those pants really make you look fat. Well, these approaches might not end well. So in our example, the technician is aware of norms and external factors and uses his skills at being assertive. Getting the attention of the person or the group can start with something like, "I'm not really comfortable with returning the airplane to service with hoses that are overdue for replacement." And then stating the problem clearly and without exaggeration, such as, "I know the hoses look fine, but there is a reason that they're life limited." Then he states the likely consequences. If a hose bursts, we could lose a critical system at an inopportune time and maybe even create a fire hazard. Then he needs to offer a solution. If it's really that important to save money, let me look and see what else is coming up. Maybe there's some non-essential upgrade that we could delay instead of delaying the hose replacement. Then for the last step, solicit feedback. I know I would feel a lot more comfortable if the hoses are replaced. What do you think about that? Or do you have another idea? And for the flight crew example, how might a new FO deal with a captain who repeatedly violates the sterile cockpit during taxi? The FO might get the captain's attention by stating that he or she is not comfortable having a conversation at this point. The FO might state the consequences. I don't want to increase our chances of having a runway incursion. As a solution, the FO might say, I would like to continue this conversation, but after we get to altitude. And then for feedback, is that okay with you? Should be sufficient. Discussion on assertiveness. This one says, Asiana, 3 pilots. Apparently no one spoke up. Low and so on final. Cultural norm. Oh, there are books that could, should, and will be written on that Asiana crash at San Francisco. I'm sure norms was part of it, and I'm sure there was some cultural there. Let's see, how can I say this diplomatically? 12 years ago, I did quite a bit of consulting with an international air carrier, and the culture there, which was probably similar to the culture here, was not the same airline, was that the captain was God, and everyone else was there to serve God, and procedures just got violated left and right, and nobody challenged anybody. I'm hoping that by now things have changed worldwide in that, perhaps not, but I'm guessing pretty certainly that this was norms in action. Remember, we had a training captain, we had all kinds of things going on, and you know, nobody spoke up, and I'm sure that that was norms. And possibly now the airlines have CRM. They have to have CRM. These people had all had CRM, but airline CRM is a whole lot different than business aviation CRM or industrial CRM. But we need to tell people, and it needs to be reinforced by management, that they are empowered to speak up. And part of that goes back to the pre-flight briefing. I do a lot of work on the pre-flight briefing when I teach CRM, because we need to set the tone, especially if the crew hasn't flown together or hasn't flown together in a long time. The captain needs to state unequivocally, hey, if something doesn't seem right, or if you see me doing something wrong, or you don't like something, speak up. I'd rather have you speak up than just suffer in silence. And that should be part of the pre-flight briefing as well. There's a lot that can be done about this. Someone else said, how about delayed evac of the South Korean ferry? Yeah, there's a lot of information that hasn't come out of that yet, but I don't know. I just really don't know enough about that, but it certainly could come into that. Someone else said, didn't Japan Airlines land short of the bay at San Francisco many years ago? Something sticks in the back of my mind about that, but not sure, and I can't address that offhand. And somebody else added, reminds me of the KLM disaster. I bet you're all familiar with that if you're in aviation. That was one of the beginnings of CRM as well. It happened in the Canary Islands back in the late 70s, I believe. A KLM 747 and a Pan Am 747 collided on the runway. The KLM captain was a famous captain. His picture was featured in magazines promoting KLM. He was the senior pilot, the chief pilot, and he got tired of waiting for air traffic control. They were on the verge of timing out on the flight. The problem was the airport was pretty close to being 0-0 in fog, and there was only one runway. The airplanes had to back taxi on the runway. They couldn't fit on the taxiway, or there was no taxiway. I don't recall which. And the KLM pilot taxied into position and pushed the power up over the objections of other crew members in the airplane. And the Pan Am airplane was back taxiing on the runway and tried to make a quick turn and get off. And the KLM airplane rotated early and tried to get up. It just didn't work, and they collided. It was a terrible disaster. That was one of the things that really launched CRM as well. Yep, those are all good good comments. Thank you. Anybody else want to type anything in here on that one? No. Okay, good. Let's move on. So in conclusion, we talked about some human factors that can cause us to make errors and be less safe. We talked about the role of complacency, looked at a couple of tools to help us fight it. We discussed the powerful effects of pressure or external factors, as we call it in aviation. And we took a look at how distractions can cause us to fixate and add links to an error chain. We saw some ways to avoid adding those links. We talked about normative social influence, or norms, and how that can cause us to violate even the most basic safety principles if we're not careful. Finally, we discussed how to be more assertive when we need to be. We just scratched the surface on discussing these 5 factors. There are many more, and each one has several sub-factors. At Bright Spot, we apply our knowledge of human factors to help companies, both in aviation and in many other fields, to reduce workplace errors. Whether the workplace is the flight deck, a maintenance facility, a hospital, medical practice, whether human or veterinarian, a refinery, manufacturing facility, human error happens. We work with your staff to identify problems and create fixes. Human error can never be completely eliminated as long as humans are involved, but the frequency and the severity of the errors can be significantly reduced. If you'd like to explore how we might be able to assist your company, please contact me for a no obligation, no cost discussion. My contact information is there. Now we're at a time when it would be good to open microphones if anyone wants to chat. I believe all the nobody has their hand up. If you'd like to participate in live discussion, go over on the right side of your screen and click on that little symbol that looks like a hand. There's a little, I think it's blue, arrow pointing upward on it, and I will get a signal on my machine here that says you would like to participate, and I can open your microphone. Nobody wants to talk to us today. Wow, I'm glad I put in the typed in questions. Oh, here's one. Oh, you know what? I need to type something here to get them up to the top. Bear with me. Bear with me. Okay, how about Scott? Scott S. Your microphone is open. Scott, are you there? Scott? Going once, going twice. Oh, that's too bad. No Scott. Sometimes microphones don't work as they should. And another one came up to the top and went away. Let me bring them up here again. Anybody else? Go ahead and click your raised hand if anyone would like to ask a question or comment. I'm not seeing any more. Let me just try this again. Here we go. How about Lloyd? Oops. Hold on. And Lloyd S. Go ahead, sir. Lloyd, are you there? Well, I'm not doing very well here today. Lloyd, are you there? Microphone is open. No Lloyd. Okay, that one went away. Well, let's try Alan. I'm sorry, let's try Scott again. Scott, I'm hearing something. Are you there?
Scott K here.
Yeah, there you go. Your microphone's open.
Yeah, there we go.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I just think this is, first of all, a great webinar. And I've been able to apply a lot of what I've learned in aviation across all aspects of my life, and I really appreciate this particular human factors part of it is probably one of the most useful across the board, and just happy to study it more deeply with you today. So,
Well, great.
that's my comment.
Thank you very much. Let me try you, Scott. Lloyd, let's try Lloyd again. Lloyd, are you there? Going once, going twice. No Lloyd. Okay. Anybody else like to make a comment or ask a question? Nobody. Okay. All right. So here's the rest of my contact information here. BrightSpotSafety.com is our website. On Facebook, Facebook.com/BrightSpotSafety, and you can follow me on Twitter at Gene_Benson. We have as I look away at that, I have a whole bunch of written questions coming up here. Wow. Okay. Some people want copies of the presentation. I will provide that. I will address you by email. And a couple other questions that we covered. I will answer those. I like the workarounds you said about procedures and deviating from them unofficially. I can certainly relate to that here at work. And a couple questions on will the slides be available. I'll tell you what I'm going to try and do. I don't know if I'll be successful at this or not. I'm going to try I did record the webinar. Recording it is easy. Reading somebody talked about evil sisters. It was the Sinister Sisters. We'll talk about that later. Recording it is easy. Getting it posted so that it works in some format is a little more problematic. It's a very large video file. I'm going to try to add it to my YouTube channel and see if that works. It might be too long. YouTube might not do it, but we'll see. Anyway, I also have a YouTube channel. If you just go to YouTube and search for Gene Benson, you'll probably find my channel there. Most of that applies to general aviation safety. Okay. Anyone who would like to have a PDF of the presentation, just shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to send that to you. Or any other questions, comments, anything. Just go ahead and shoot me an email, gene.benson@brightspotsafety.com, and we will go from there. So with that, we'll close it out. Thank you very much for attending. I appreciate everyone's participation with the questions, and appreciate you giving me an hour of your time this afternoon. That's great, and I wish you all success in whatever endeavors you have. With that, we'll say good afternoon.